Welcome back to all of our friends out there in the Bosshole Transformation Nation. This is your host, John Brower, welcoming you to a really unique and special episode of the Bosshole Chronicles. This is actually a flashback, but it's a flashback to our very first episode. It turns out that today is exactly the 5th anniversary of the launch of the Bosshole Chronicles. I cannot believe it. December 16th, 2020 is when we first rolled out the Bosshole Chronicles. So I thought, hey, as a little bit of a celebration to 5 years of doing this work and doing it for you, in all appreciation for our listeners and our followers out there in the Bosshole Transformation Nation, let's take a little walk back down memory lane and listen to our first one. We actually rolled out 3 episodes on the 16th in 2020, but this is one that was kind of near and dear to my heart because it was my Bosshole story, and I just wanted to reshare it with you. And just to provide a little bit of context of what has happened in the last 5 years, we have published 262 episodes, and the Bosshole Chronicles, thanks to you, thanks to all of you, we are in the top 10% of podcasts worldwide. That is over 3.7 million podcasts, according to Listen Notes, who tracks popularity of podcasts. So thank you to all of you. Let's jump into our very first episode. The Bosshole Chronicles are brought to you by Real Good Ventures, a talent optimization firm helping organizations diagnose their most critical people and execution issues with world-class analytics. Make sure to check out all the resources in the show notes and be sure to follow us and share your feedback. Enjoy today's episode.
Well, greetings and welcome to the Bosshole Chronicles. This is actually our inaugural episode. I'm here with my partner and friend and great colleague, John Brower. John,
Nice.
How are you?
I'm good, Sarah. I'm real good, Sarah. How are you?
I am also real good.
Real good.
Yes, it's so great to kick off something that we have definitely heard from others and generated a lot of enthusiasm about, because I think it's a common challenge that many employees face in the work world. It's having to deal with a boss hole. And today we're going to launch our podcast by zeroing in, John, and getting to hear a little bit of your story, your boss hole story.
My Bosshole story. Well,
Yeah.
I'm glad to share it. I have a lot of them, but this one I think really kind of captures what it means to work for a boss hole.
Yeah. Well, I'm intrigued, John. Well, let's hear a little bit about you. What's your reference profile? You know, we use people analytics, we use behavioral data to better understand and diagnose the challenges that we encounter with people, including ourselves. So let's hear a little bit about your reference profile.
Okay, happy to do that. I'm a captain. By the way, you're doing a really good job at this. I will edit that part out.
Okay.
I'm a captain, and so my reference profile is known for being independent. I really like variety and change, flexibility. I tend to be competitive and driving. I've also, while I am non-conforming, I also understand the need for some rules. I prefer my own rules, but change is something that I like. I normally will be at the front end of it, and controlling the big picture is also something that's known for or is indicative of a captain reference profile. I also know that I can come up as being a bit authoritative and brusque.
Mm-hmm.
My wife would say, "Why do you think you have to be the boss of everyone?" And she's right. But anyway, and I do struggle with direction sometimes and structure. But that's kind of what a captain is all about, and it's pretty much me to a T.
Well, and I love the simplicity of the title captain as a reference profile. It kind of sums it up in one word. I certainly find you to be a natural leader and someone who seeks to have impact. You're sociable, you're friendly, you're people oriented. And I also like the fact that you said you're competitive. I think you can also jump to the challenge when there's pressure for time. Like when there's a need to move fast and change things up, you do really well in those environments. So it's good to have that background. Set the stage for us. Let's hear a little bit about your boss hole blunder, your boss hole experience.
Got it. Well, we're going to call my boss hole Fred, and of course, we never use any real names or organizations on here, but just to maintain that anonymity, because this
Yeah.
isn't about being mean. This is about learning. So,
Hmm.
Fred, just to set the stage for you, I always had the opinion that Fred would have been a great neighbor. If you were building a shed in your backyard or you were putting a deck on the back of your house, I mean, he would have brought over a cooler of beer and helped you with it, and then sat around and just talked about anything. And I mean, he really was that kind of guy, very generous in spirit. When it came to being a manager, that's where everything just fell apart for him. And really quick, before I get to the actual boss hole story, I remember, now you know a little bit about me as a captain. Well, I was out there in a remote territory. I was furthest away from the home office. I was opening a brand new territory. Always had the highest sales. I was blessed with a great area, understood the product line, great customer base, and I was developing out there. But I never heard from him. And so a captain, even though I tend to be task focused, my extroversion's pretty high. So my need for social interaction is still there, but I was working remotely. And I remember one time calling Fred on the phone. We had a quick check in, and I said, "Hey, Fred, I hadn't heard from you in a while. I just want to see how things are going." And he said, "Well, if you were screwing up, I'd have given you a call." And I was like,
Okay.
yeah, there you go, right
Good
there.
to know.
So,
Hmm.
while he may have been generous in spirit of being a neighbor, he sucked at being a manager and didn't understand how to develop people. So I was opening this territory, and he was coming out to travel with me. And there are two examples from this particular trip. And Fred came out. I picked him up at the airport. And whenever I had a manager come out and travel with me, I always wanted to provide them at least with an overview of, these are the customers or the prospects on whom we're calling, and these are our objectives. Just lay the groundwork. And so he's not walking into a cold. We had one meeting with a plant manager, and so the products we manufactured went into paper making, and we were talking to the plant manager of a large mill. And one of the aspects of paper making is, paper is like 98% water before it goes on the paper machine or the fourdrinier, and all the water drains off, and then you're left with the paper fibers, and they dry that. Well, that slurry, before it goes onto the paper machine, it's called furnish. And now this is years ago, but I think that's still the right term, but it was called furnish, and the furnish would go onto the paper machine. So we're sitting there in this call, and Fred referred to it as furbish with a B.
Hmm.
And he said furbish. If he said it once, he said it 10 times. And the plant manager, who is not only a chemical engineer, but a paper chemist, while Fred was talking, wasn't looking at Fred. He was looking right at me, like saying, as well as I, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I mean, this was the thought bubble above the customer's head, and I'm thinking, I mean, I'm cringing in my seat, thinking, please let this end. And Fred just kept on a going, and while we finished the call, it was still a good, he was still a good customer. But we walked out of there, and it just was an example where he tried to pull him or pass himself off as having some expertise, which he didn't. And it
Sure.
really was horrible. So
Awkward.
yeah, totally awkward. So we left there, and there were some of those those glances with the plant manager of, yep, I know, I get it. He didn't know what he was talking about, and I apologize for that. So
Mm.
in that same trip, we were going to have dinner with another customer. Now, this is a big customer down in Chicago. And this customer, we're going to call him Bob. Bob never wanted to meet at his office. Bob was a really high level purchasing dude. He dealt with tens of millions of dollars of product that were shipped and distributed around the country. We had a segment of his business, and he was very, very consistent in providing us with work. But all we had to do was this: we would meet him at his favorite restaurant outside of the city. We would sit at the bar, have a drink. We would have dinner, and then we would go to the piano bar, have another drink. And all we had to do, and I told Fred this beforehand, 4 things we need to talk about. That's it. Just 4 things. Number 1 are his racehorses. Number 2, he loves to sail, and I know he takes a couple of sailing trips a year. 3, he's going to get married, so let's just check in on his fiance, what's going on with those plans. And he loved to go to Vegas. He loved casinos. So I laid the groundwork, and we go in there, we meet him at the bar, and we're having a drink. And I said to Bob, I said, "Hey, so what's going on with the horses? How's everything going?" And he started to explain he was actually looking for a new trainer. And then all of a sudden, Fred just launched into, "Oh, horses, horses. I'll tell you about horses. You want to know about horses? Well, I lived in Louisville for a long time, and I can tell you all about horses." Now, I'm sure he went to Churchill Downs. I'm sure he's seen a horse in his life. He's never owned them. He's never trained them. And I mean, cut the client off right there. And so I
Ooh.
always try to direct it back to the customer, to Bob. And we wrap up our drink. We go to get our table. And this was he was a regular there. So this was the sort of scenario where the chef would come out and see him. I mean, this was a big deal. So it was
Mhm.
all about the customer. And so we're sitting at dinner, and I bring up sailing trips. What's going on? Tell me about what's happening. And he said, well, his fiance and he were, renting this boat, or they were going to be getting some friends and crewing on this, 44-foot or 54-foot sailboat. And all of a sudden, again, Fred, "Oh, sailboats. You want to know about sailboats? I'll tell you all about sailboats," and blah, 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 blah. I mean, it was horrible, and
Oh.
it was so awkward, and I was scared that he was gonna say something about his fiancée, and it's like, "Fred, don't push it that far, because you don't know the woman, and this is gonna get super awkward." So then we go to the piano bar, and, have a and I mean, it's been a nice enough evening, but clearly we've taken the wrong approach here, and Fred is not paying attention, and not staying within the guardrails that I provided. And then we're sitting at the bar and order drinks. And they had this cool little trio, piano player and a drummer and a sax player or whatever, and just great. And we ordered drinks, and I said, "So what's up? Any trips to Vegas planned?" And I mean, Bob didn't even have a chance to respond, and Fred's like, "Oh, hey, you know what? We have this new casino boat that's been put on a river right near our city, and we've been going over there and doing this stuff." And then Fred says, "Hey, excuse me, I need to use the men's room." So he stands up and he leaves to go use the men's room. And Bob leans over to me, I mean, like real close, and says, "You don't ever have to bring him back again."
Mhm. Wow.
And that was like, "Oh my gosh." And I just nodded and I said, "Understood." Um, and I simply said, "Listen, you know, I always appreciate the chance to get together. And while this may not have been the greatest experience, it's still good to see you." Well, Fred comes back, we finish up, you know, Bob takes off. And I would see Bob every month. And so Fred, we get done, he goes, "Hey, I thought that went really well."
Oh, wow.
Yeah, "I thought that was great. He's a great guy." Yes, that's true. No, it went horribly.
Yeah.
You totally took the conversation away from him. And he said, "How often do you see him?" And I was a total coward. And I said, "Oh, I don't know, every, 6, 8 weeks or so. It's kind of sporadic." And it wasn't sporadic at all. I mean,
Mhm.
it was like clockwork with Bob. And
Mhm.
he goes, "Oh man, I'd love to come back and do that again. That was super great. He's a great client, and you got a great relationship with him." And I never took him back there again. I wussed out. I totally did.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was
Meaning,
super awkward. Go ahead.
yeah, well, when you say you wussed out, you had a moment of truth, a truth moment there where you could have said, "Hey, Fred, contrary to how you think it went, here's how it really went down."
Absolutely.
You
Yeah.
opted out. Let me ask you this, John. When you think about Fred, And we're not here to assassinate characters or discredit people in any way. we're
Right.
we're here to try to better understand what could be blind spots, what could be gaps in ability, for example, that any leader can learn from, and
Right.
certainly we can each learn from. So what do you think Fred's issues were? Like, what's Fred's deal? What made Fred such a boss hole?
Well, okay. So when I got into management, and then subsequently when I started to train and develop managers and leaders, one of the things I always said is, look, as a manager, you need to be an asset to your direct reports, not a liability. And
Mhm,
so I don't know if he just didn't pay attention to the guidance that I provided or the direction that the call was supposed to take. Um, I don't know if there was this need for him to constantly vocalize and sort of take over the topics. I have
mhm,
no idea.
mhm,
This guy was not a he wasn't a rookie. I mean, he had sales experience, but um I don't know how successful he was, especially when I got to see him really make the call and the meeting about himself rather than the customer. So I think that maybe there was he didn't trust or listen to the guidance of his salesperson. He made more statements than he asked questions, and I think for anybody that's a telltale sign of, I would say, maybe um a lack of professionalism or
mhm.
sales or business acumen.
Yeah. Well, and I think about when we see challenging performance, it's really comes down to an issue of motivation or ability.
Right,
And there's complexity within each of those. But, there's the briefcase. Like, do we have the professional experience and knowledge in the briefcase to be in appropriate conversation with
right,
direct reports and clients, et cetera? Um, and to me, it sounds like if we were to sort of diagnose his reference profile, he's highly independent, task focused, perhaps. This is not part of PI, but we would say egocentric. So
mhm,
he kind of sees the world through his experience. And to me, it's just a colossal lack of self awareness. And it would be
mhm,
a testament to the research I know that we've read that indicates self-awareness is really the number one sought after characteristic for effective leadership. You have to
right,
kind of know yourself, and then it allows you to be aware of what's happening with your audience. So self-awareness and emotional expression lend themselves to better empathy. And we're not talking about the touchy-feely kind of empathy, but it's
right,
it's the tactical read of, wow, our client looks highly disenchanted at this moment, or my direct report is squirming in his seat. And I wonder if I'm venturing into territory that's not appropriate, for example. So that was really challenging. And one of the questions we always like to ask our participants is, how did you manage the situation? Kind of already answered that. You proceeded on in your
right,
relationship with your client. You didn't necessarily take the opportunity to level set with Fred and say, that was horrible and I never want to have that happen again. But I do have a question for you, John.
mhm.
Given your high degree of dominance, your high degree of extroversion, your lower patience, and your lower formality, what would you say, you may have contributed to the gravity of the situation, meaning how you interpreted it? Like it was
Mm.
bad for you, but the way you looked at it, the way you experienced it, what do you think made that worse for you because of your reference profile? Any thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think my need for control and to really have a bit more influence over the situation was
Mhm.
completely challenged.
Yep.
I felt completely helpless with with him making statements that were or using words that were completely or terminology that was completely wrong. I mean, and in front of a customer who knew better, and then taking over the conversation, there was no way that I could really draw that back without. I didn't want to embarrass him.
Right.
That would have been,
Absolutely.
yeah. But I can assure you, I think the way I took control afterward was I just never permitted him to come back and travel with me
Right.
because now I'm not saying that that's good. You know, I can assure you that it served as a great example for me when I eventually moved into management because I ended up taking his job. He got moved to another division that ultimately got sort of abandoned by the organization. I took over his job, but it was a great
Gotcha.
learning experience for me.
Right. Oh, for
Um,
sure.
because I always wanted to make sure I as a leader when I took over that team, which is awkward. It's awkward to be promoted to manage your former peers, which
Right.
I'm not sure I ever think that that's a really good idea. I think that's but in small companies, you may not have a choice. But I always wanted to make sure that I was an asset to them and not a roadblock.
Hmm.
So we always would talk about what has to happen in this call, what does success look like ahead of time, and then debrief afterward. And just we had the kind of relationship where they could be very blunt with me, but I just didn't want to become a roadblock or a liability for them. And
Yeah.
I would actually during the course of the year, they would evaluate me as part of performance management. And I would say, how can I help you be more successful? In what ways do I present, a roadblock or a liability for you?
Right.
And that was huge for me, but I didn't, one, that all gets back to trust. I did not have that kind of relationship with Fred.
Hmm.
And of course, in your work with emotional intelligence or just the practices of high performing teams or highly functioning teams,
Hmm.
trust has to be established early. And we did not have that. I didn't trust that he had the expertise to do what I needed him to do. And I didn't trust that he had my best interest at heart because he just ended up talking about himself or
Right.
making it about him. So,
Right.
so it was a great learning experience, but a really awkward and challenging one for sure.
Well, and thankfully you didn't lose a client over it because
Right.
it sounded like that was a potential outcome. I can't help but think about American Idol tryouts. One of the favorite things I like to do in downtime is watch some of the videos of any of those singing shows. But in American Idol, they show you the reel of all the great tryouts, all the really bad ones,
Right.
and there's that person that shows up and they start singing, and you're thinking to yourself, how come no one has ever told them that they shouldn't be singing?
They can't
Like,
sing. That's
it's
right.
not their gifting.
Right.
And I can't help but think of Fred, and my guess is you're not the only person who experienced that with Fred or found themselves in a situation where he almost blew it
Right.
because he's so focused on himself and so unaware of his awkwardness. But, then the question becomes, why hasn't anybody told Fred,
Right.
"Dude, you need to stop doing that. You're being a boss hole."
Yeah. Yeah, man, you're hurting our cause. So for
Yeah.
me, I think for any manager or supervisor listening to this, go out of your way to make sure that you have a good and I would say, well, maybe Sarah, you have a better way of saying this, a trusting dialogue or healthy dialogue where you are willing to accept feedback even when it's not favorable. Because
Right.
your job is to strengthen and equip and develop your direct reports. It's not about you anymore. But in
Yes.
that effort, you're going to grow yourself. But gosh almighty, have those conversations and don't become a roadblock. That was um and again, my role in this is that I didn't say anything. And that would have
Mhm.
helped me grow and mature as a professional. But yep, I took the easy way out. I was remote. I I just I just ignored his request to come travel and
Yeah.
weeded it out.
Well, but, at the end of the day here, we can take away, some great tidbits, to remember, especially those of us who are responsible for developing other people.
Hmm.
I love, John, how you always say, "Hey, if you're a manager or a leader and the number one item in your job description isn't developer of people, something is wrong."
Right.
So I think it's a nice reminder that people who are responsible for the performance and the effectiveness and the well-being of others, they need to have that level of vulnerability to be able to receive candid feedback. And it's not necessarily all bad.
No,
But yeah, let's find out what people need more of from us and less of from us.
absolutely. Good.
Well done. Yeah. So, John, thanks for helping us kick off the podcast series called The Bosshole Chronicles. We have many, many more stories to share. We've had some great interviews, many more to come. So, we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks very much for checking out this episode of the Bosshole Chronicles. It was so good to have you here. And if you have your own Bosshole story that you want to share with the Bosshole Transformation Nation, just reach out. You can email us at mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. Again, mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. We'll see you next time.